The Denver Broncos will open up their season at home in 2025 against the number one overall pick and the Tennessee Titans. We'll tell you why the Broncos defense is going to present Cam Ward with a tough test to open up the year. Here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day. For all your Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more, this is the best place to be every single day, all year long. A special shout out to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you're not yet an everydayer, it's simple. It's easy to become one. All you have to do is hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. I'm Cody Roark, credentialed Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. I cover the team in person daily in Dove Valley at every practice, every home game, sometimes go to the away games as well. And I bring my thoughts here on Locked On Broncos. Sayre Bedinger will join us tonight for the NFL schedule release, the full-on Broncos schedule reveal. We'll go through that tonight. He's in Disney World with his family here. But we got a lot to break down here on today's episode of the show, Broncos Country. As we know it today, this morning, Wednesday, the Broncos have 3 confirmed games this upcoming season. We know who they're going to open up with. The Tennessee Titans at home in Week 1. We'll also talk about a Christmas Day matchup where the Broncos are hoping to have a Merry Nixmas against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 17. And then the Broncos getting more stamps on their passport, heading overseas to play in the 2025 NFL London games. 3 games that we know of. We'll obviously break down our thoughts initially to that. We'll share some responses from everyone in Broncos Country as well on their thoughts on that here. But today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Check it out at FanDuel today. Let's open up here. Look, obviously, the NFL schedule release happens here this evening, 6 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. And for a lot of NFL teams across the entire league, it is their social media Super Bowl because you have a chance to get really creative with how you film the schedule release. The AFC West rival Chargers, they always do a great job with their schedule releases. The Broncos, I think, have done a tremendous job with their schedule releases in the past. Specifically, I think what Peyton Manning has been able to do has been good. There's some sort of Ted Lasso tie-in to the Broncos schedule release this year, I believe. So we'll see how that kind of works here. But the NFL schedule release always baffles me because there's this buildup and there's this anticipation, hey, the schedule's going to drop. And really, leading up to the day of the schedule release, there are network announcements, there are platform announcements that say, hey, this game is going to be played here. And so it kind of spoils some of the games, and people are starting to piece together like mad scientists. Okay, this game has been leaked. This game's been leaked. All right, that means that this team will play, this team will not play. I'd say let it just be. Let the teams release the schedule. Let's have fun with it. Of course, yes, networks want to get press releases out there that highlight maybe a big matchup here. But I just feel like you have a lot of people that kind of spoil the schedule release by dropping a lot of these games early, kind of takes the fun out of it. But that's just my opinion here. So let's get into, obviously, what we know now. Jordan Schultz, who is a very trustworthy reporter, regardless of what you think of his beef with our good friend Ian Rappaport, who Ian's always been great to us. Jordan Schultz, who I do trust, posted that the Broncos and Bo Nix, they're going to open up the 2025 NFL season on Week 1 at home against Cam Ward, the number 1 overall pick, and the Tennessee Titans. And look, I think this is an interesting matchup when you look at parallels drawn here because last year, the Broncos, they had to open up the season against the Seattle Seahawks on the road, which we know is a hostile environment. And you look at Cam Ward, his first ever NFL game. Welcome to the NFL, rookie. You got to take on the Denver Broncos defense, a defensive unit that led the NFL in sacks last year with 63 total. And obviously Ward's athletic and elusive. The Broncos going to have to work on trying to contain him. I do think that Cam's going to have a pretty good supporting cast around him, though, that might help him out a little bit. And I'll dive into that here in a minute. But, for the Broncos, this is a great way. Hey, you get to open up the season at home once again. And you have an opportunity to start off with an AFC conference win. And look, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be handed to you. But on paper, the Broncos should win this game. But as we've seen in the NFL, what happened last year, the Titans, they got the number 1 overall pick. That means nothing now at this point. How they did last year means nothing now because this is a roster that has players that are now in a year in the system. You've added some new pieces around you that are going to help, potentially Cam Ward fit in and get a little bit better here. So I think first off, let's take a look at the Titans offense and maybe the test that's there. Cam Ward at quarterback. I think you got Tony Pollard at the running back position, and you got Tyjae Spears, who is explosive. He can do damage if you don't contain him. So I think they got two very capable backs here. Obviously, former Bronco Lloyd Cushenberry, he suffered a season-ending, I think, Achilles injury last year. I don't know if he'll be ready for this game, but obviously if he is, he gets to face his former team this upcoming season. But then you look at some of their other skill players offensively, a wide receiver. They've got obviously Treylon Burks, who they invested a lot in after they traded away A.J. Brown. Said, all right, Treylon, you're the guy now. It hasn't quite worked out that way. But then veteran wide receiver Tyler Lockett, who had a big game against the Broncos, ironically in week 1 last year in Bo Nix's first game. You get a veteran, reliable playmaker right there to add into the mix. Calvin Ridley, who we know is a great route runner. He's a great receiver. You've got him into the mix. That's a tough challenge for you. James Prochet's a speedy wide receiver, so you can't factor in the equation. He's not going to matter at all. I think he's going to be a threat, especially in the return game. And then they get Alec Ayamanor out of Stanford, a prospect in the NFL draft that a lot of people in Broncos country certainly wanted. And then you go through a tight end, Gunnar Helm. They get him, obviously, another player that the Broncos country wanted in this year's NFL draft, Chig Okonkwo. So they have a solid tight end room, solid wide receiver room. And that's not in factor. And they even have Van Jefferson in the mix as well, Xavier Restrepo. I mean, they have a pretty solid team around. But you know what the Broncos have? They have a Patrick Surtain. As the Avengers, they said, we have a Hulk. The Broncos, they have a PS2. And Jahdae Barron, Riley Moss, Jaquan McMillan. You have Brandon Jones at safety. You have new additions on the defense like Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw. You bring in back that defensive line that had 63 sacks last season there with John Franklin Myers, Zach Allen, DJ Jones. You have Malcolm Roach in the rotation. And then we'll see maybe Savion Jones have a chance to make his impact here early on. I think this is actually a pretty nice matchup. I don't feel like when you look at the tail of the tape, I don't feel like it's necessarily one-sided. But here's the thing. The Broncos, I feel like they have the experience. They have the advantage of being at home. And as we know, playing in a loud place is a tough test for a rookie. That was a challenge that Bo Nix certainly struggled with a little bit in that week 1 opener last year against the Seahawks. Cam Ward has to come to Empower Field a mile high, where we know on third down, the stadium, it is shaking. It's raucous. And the fans, they're into it. This is a great atmosphere to open up. But for Denver to open up week 1 AFC conference game, love that. Denver's got to take care of business in conference play this year. They did great in non-conference play against the NFC last year, but you have to take care of business against your conference opponents. And this is obviously one test. But we know what week 1 is. We don't know what week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5 are in terms of matchups officially. We know what week 6 is. The Broncos, they'll be on the road in London. We'll talk about the game a little bit later on here in today's show. But how does that kind of set the table for what everything looks like? Because if Denver's playing week 6 in London, we think it's a safe assumption for us to say, okay, week 7, that's going to be a bye week. So a bye week that's going to come 2 to 3, maybe even 4 weeks earlier than what we've been accustomed over the course of the last 2 seasons here for Denver. How you play in the beginning part of the season is obviously important. But then that means you're going to have a longer second half season stretch. And we all know Denver's got some tough opponents on their schedule, including the Philadelphia Eagles, defending Super Bowl champions. We know they're going to play the Kansas City Chiefs in the second half of the schedule. So this is going to set up for a very, very interesting dynamic here for the Broncos this upcoming season. So with that said, Broncos country, we got our week 1 thoughts here, obviously on this matchup here, the Tennessee Titans. Make sure you share them here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. We're not done yet. We know that the Broncos, they'll play a primetime game on Christmas Day, where they're hoping it is a Merry Nixmas against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll get to that and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. And as you all know, FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, the NBA playoffs in full swing. Every night delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action, because FanDuel, they make it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and to win big, where if you place your first $5 bet and it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets that you can use on the rest of the NBA playoffs. Let's take a look at some of the lines here for some of the games on Wednesday. The New York Knicks are up 3-1 against the Boston Celtics after Jason Tatum's season-ending Achilles injury. The interesting thing here, the New York Knicks on the spread are 4.5-point underdogs against the Celtics. The Celtics are still the favorite at home despite not having Jason Tatum. And then the Minnesota Timberwolves and Anthony Edwards have a chance to close out their series against Steph Curry, who's not playing in this game. But the Golden State Warriors, they are 11-point favorites on the spread right here, and they're massive favorites at home to close out the series. So if you think that the Knicks are going to close things out, even though that they are underdogs in this game, FanDuel is the perfect place to get in on the action. So check it out today. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. The Denver Broncos will have a primetime matchup against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas Day. The only unfortunate news is that it is a road game. It's not a home game for the Broncos. We'll get to that here on today's episode of the show. Real quick, want to say thank you once again to everyone in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there. Thanks for tuning in, making the show exactly what it is. We appreciate you. And remember, you can get this show wherever you get your podcast, or you can get us daily on YouTube. So make sure you're subscribed or followed so you never miss out on a brand new episode every single day. Plus, bonus episodes like tonight with the NFL schedule release. You're going to get reaction from Sayre Bedinger and myself here. So one other game that was really the first game, I'd say, of the entire Broncos schedule that was confirmed, that was announced by the NFL itself, and Amazon Prime Christmas Day Showdown. The Denver Broncos and Bo Nix traveling to take on Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 17. Now, in my schedule prediction, I had the Broncos closing out the season against the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 18. So maybe there's a possibility that my final two picks flip-flop here. Now, obviously, Denver's on the road at Kansas City. I had them at Kansas City Week 10 in a Sunday night football matchup. This is going to be at Kansas City Week 17, Thursday night football, Christmas Day. So maybe they'll close out Week 18 against the Raiders at home. So we'll see how this all goes here for Denver. But, you know, the Broncos, this will be their fifth game that they have played on Christmas Day. So far, they have a 2-2 record in these matchups. And every single time that the Broncos have played on Christmas Day, all five of these matches, well, the previous four plus this one will make five. They're all road games. Denver has yet to host a Christmas Day game in the Mile High City, which I feel like the NFL, what are you doing? Like, do you not want there to be a potential snow game? Because look, Christmas Day, Kansas City, Missouri, you're telling me there's not a chance for a snow or for a blizzard or anything like that? Let the Broncos host a Christmas Day game or a Thanksgiving game at some point. That's my only plea that I would certainly like to throw out there into the universe, but the NFL is not going to listen to me. But it's the perfect opportunity because this is a high-stakes game here for the Broncos because Bo Nix versus Patrick Mahomes. Now, as we know, they'll face each other before this game because Week 17, you're not going to play the Chiefs Week 17, Week 18. So this will be the third time that Bo Nix and Patrick Mahomes have faced off. The first time when we saw these guys face off last season at Arrowhead, the Broncos and Bo Nix, they led a game-winning drive downfield, and unfortunately, a special teams error cost them the game. The blocked field goal where the Broncos would have went on the road and beat Patrick Mahomes. Could you imagine the storylines? And part of me is wondering, if the Broncos and Knicks did win that game against Kansas City, would that have shifted the narrative about Bo Nix, who's historically good rookie season, didn't get talked about because of Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels, obviously, as we know, very good quarterback, very deserving, but Bo Nix belonged in that same conversation. And that simply hasn't taken place, which is nuts to me. You get a chance to have these guys match up for what will be their third time. And what will the storyline be in this game? Because Week 17, as you know, hey, you got a couple weeks before the playoffs begin. The Broncos have aspirations to win the AFC West. And that's a tough task because the Chargers, they're a tough team. They loaded up. The Raiders, they should be better than what they were last year. The Chiefs, even though that they've suffered some losses, you know, they came off of a brutal Super Bowl loss. People of the formula, Travis Kelce's getting a little bit older. You can't fully write off Kansas City, right? They're the favorite to win the division until somebody dethrones them. And Denver and the Chargers, I think, are going to be the two teams that are going to be the best position to do so. And this is a great opportunity if Denver takes care of business in AFC conference play and other divisional games here. You have an opportunity to potentially go into this Week 17 game with division claim at stake, playoff claims at stake. And look, yes, Denver wants to host a playoff game, but ideally you want to get in the dance here. You need to become road warriors. This, in my opinion, this has the atmosphere of a playoff game. I mean, Christmas Day, one of the loudest environments in the NFL against a hated division rival. This will be very fun. Now, Denver is obviously going to play Kansas City at home early on in this schedule. We don't know when that's going to take place, though. So I think having a win already against the Chiefs at this point, that would be huge for the Broncos going into this matchup, because I think if things play out maybe how we anticipate, if the Broncos stay healthy, they play up to the standard in which we know they can and that they know that they can. This has all the makings for the Broncos to potentially secure a tiebreaker over Kansas City if Denver takes care of business. Now, what I'm talking about is last year there was the difference in one-score games. You know, the Chiefs, they were in a lot of one-score games last year, and they found a way to pull it out. They found a way to win those one-score, one-possession games, whereas the Broncos, they lost a handful of those types of games, minus, blowout against the Baltimore Ravens. So if Denver can flip that narrative a little bit, they might have a chance here to be in a great position to maybe lock up a playoff spot at this point if they beat Kansas City on Christmas Day, maybe even the division, but that would be a tough stretch here. I think Broncos fans, the one thing that I asked when I went to Twitter and I posted and asked them to send their thoughts in, a lot of Broncos fans were frustrated that this game isn't in Denver, and certainly I understand that. But do you think that the NFL schedule makers are going to send Patrick Mahomes on the road on Christmas Day, whereas right now the Chiefs are the moneymaker for the NFL in terms of image, right? You have Travis Kelce. Yes, you have the Taylor Swift dynamic. You got Patrick Mahomes, who's, the best quarterback in the league. And they're not going to send him on the road on Christmas Day. If anything, they're going to make someone go to them. So I understand that the Broncos, they got to eventually earn that right. And Bo Nix, Sean Payton, they have the perfect opportunity to kind of go through and maybe kick in the door a little bit and say, hey, we want to be in this conversation. We belong here. We want to host a game. And then also the AFC West is changing. We want to take that over. That's the goal of the franchise here. Easier said than done. But also a lot of the fact too, there are some people that don't have Amazon Prime. And I understand it. We're in a technologically savvy era now where it's easier to get these things, but there are a lot of fans that don't necessarily have access, or there's some fans that don't necessarily, can't afford it. I do think that even though this will be on Amazon Prime, I think this is the safe assumption. If you have cable locally in Denver, I think you will get it on, I think, Denver 7. I think they'll carry it. So there's still a chance that even if you don't have Amazon Prime, you can still catch this game. But this is where the NFL is heading, streaming, these other platforms. I understand the frustration of it, but this is the modern time there. So I definitely, resonate, have empathy with a lot of the fans that sent that in over. And also too, fans are saying like, hey, it's Christmas Day. Like, a lot of people, they spend the day with their family. Christmas is different for everybody. I know for me, like I work on Thanksgiving, I work on Christmas Day. I just kind of build it into my routine a little bit, but it's different. But I think there's perfect opportunities. If you're a Broncos fan in Kansas City, hey, go catch this game. This is going to be a fun game. I think, with big stakes on the line here for the season, just early superlatives. I think that's something that you should definitely check out here. But with that said, Broncos country, we're going to continue our conversation to our third game that we do know that is official here on the schedule. The Broncos, they're going to be getting that passport out. They're going to be getting another stamp on it because they are heading to London. And at what point of the season will it come? We'll dive deeper to that and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. The Denver Broncos are heading back overseas to London to take on the New York Jets. But at what juncture of the season is this coming, and does it set the table for a tough second half stretch? We'll dive deeper to that and much more here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Thank you once again to everyone in Broncos country. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen. Once again, you get all the Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more here on the show, plus bonus content like the full-on schedule, reveal reaction from Sayre Bedinger, myself a little bit later on tonight. Locked On Broncos, wherever you get your podcast, or on YouTube. Let's go into this because initially the Broncos were anticipated to play the Indianapolis Colts in Berlin this season. That was something that the front office ownership and Sean Payton were really advocating for, was to play the Colts. But the Colts had protected this game against the Broncos, according to league reports, which means that the Colts, they have a home game in Germany, but they didn't want to play the Denver Broncos. Instead, we now know the Colts will be playing the Atlanta Falcons. So they didn't want to play a team that maybe they feel like is better than him. I don't know, but to protect that, certainly an interesting dynamic here. So the Broncos like, you know what? Okay, we're not going to Berlin. We're okay with going to London. And this will be the second time since 2022 that the Broncos are heading to London, the first time under Sean Payton in which they are doing so. And obviously the last time the Broncos played in London, it was the 2022 NFL season where Evan Ingram, now current Denver Bronco, caught a touchdown against Denver in this game. The Broncos rallied back behind, Greg Dulcich making a play, Russell Wilson's shaking off a really bad start, Denver's defense coming up big against Trevor Lawrence and them to win that game in London, which ironically enough, you would have thought would have shot the Broncos up the trajectory, or the positive trajectory, and then it would have sent the Jacksonville Jaguars on a negative spiral. Instead, the Broncos went on a negative spiral, and the Jacksonville Jaguars then shot up from that point forward. They got some good momentum. So I found that to be a little interesting in terms of the ties that bind here. But obviously the Broncos, they've played overseas in London a handful of times. But this is another opportunity. It's against the New York Jets. It's against Darren Muji, who's now the GM of the Jets, who was your assistant GM, has been on your front office staff for over a decade. Now he's in control of the Jets over there alongside Aaron Glenn, who's under the Sean Payton coaching tree. So it's coach versus former mentee at that point. So Aaron Glenn facing off against a mentor of his. Justin Fields, a quarterback here. Obviously, they have some talented playmakers on offense. They've got some good defensive players still, as we all know. I mean, that's one thing that was a strength about the Jets for a large portion of last season, their defense. The Broncos game against the Jets last year was a defensive struggle. It was Denver's defense against the Jets defense. And I think in this situation here for them going overseas, it's certainly, there's some people that frown upon it. I think the NFL having games internationally, I think it's a great idea. There are so many fans in the UK that love American football, right? They're passionate about it. I think you got to be able to grow that game. But I think some people are confusing. Like in my replies I've gotten some emails from fans that are like, why are the Broncos giving up a home game to play the Jets? The Broncos are the away team in this scenario. The Jets are the home team. So Denver's not essentially losing out on a home game. Denver has 9 home games this year, 8 away games here. And obviously being on the road in London, that is one of those road games. So I'm not necessarily worried about that. This does mean that it is going to be a start time, I think, of 7:30 a.m. Mountain Time. So it's going to be an early game. So folks, you're going to have to set your alarm, wake up a little early, brew you an extra strength cup of coffee, and obviously tune in as the game takes place on NFL Network. You'll be able to catch that, obviously, even locally. I think it'll be streaming here locally as well. So if you have cable, it'll be on your local channels. But, the Broncos early on in the season, traveling overseas to London, getting some miles on their system a little bit. But the thing that I look at here is, okay, if you're playing this London game on a Sunday morning, essentially at 7:30 a.m., this means that you can't necessarily fly back and then go into another game prep. That's not going to work. So more than likely, if this game being week 6, week 7 will be the Broncos bye week, which earlier than I think what we're accustomed to. I mean, I think the last couple of years, Denver's had like a week 9, week 10 bye. You have a middle of that season, late stretch bye week, which allows you to get just a week of recoup and recovery. So we'll see how that goes. Part of me is wondering here, with Denver playing on Christmas Day against the Chiefs, does that count for their Thursday night football game? To me, I'm wondering if that's the case, because I've also seen some rumblings out there that Denver could be playing a Thursday night game this season as well. So that would make 2 games on Thursday, which I don't necessarily agree with. I don't like that. I know that they did it last year. Your Sean Payton and the Broncos say, hey, we'll take it. We'll play on Thursday night twice on the road. I don't want that to be the case here for Denver for a second consecutive season, because I understand, like, you want to be able to kind of maybe have an advantage, like, hey, we're fresh, we want to keep going. But players' bodies, I tell you, I'm in the locker room, in the week leading up to a Thursday night game, talking to players. And most guys tell me that they're in a situation where if they're playing and they play on Sunday, they got a Thursday night game, they say their bodies don't normally feel right to, like, okay, hey, I feel normal. I feel like I can move without restriction until Thursday, right? So the day you got to play, and then you got to go play another game where you're just adding more wear and tear to the body. But with the bye week coming a little bit early, that means that the Broncos' second half stretch, really from weeks 8 through week 18, that's going to be it's going to be a sledge right there. They're going to have to be, tracking uphill. And I'm very curious to see what the balance is going to be between home games here in the first half of the season. In those first 7 weeks, we already know Denver's going to open up against Tennessee. There's one. You already have one away game that you know of with the Jets in week 6 in London. So what does weeks 2 through 5 look like from a home away standpoint? Or is it going to be loaded with a couple of away games early on where you have 9 total home games all season, where your second half of the schedule is going to be primarily home games, which wouldn't be a bad thing. But if they're primarily road games, including a tough matchup on Christmas Day against the Chiefs, that's going to be tough. But I imagine Denver's going to open up at home against the Titans. I imagine they're going to close out the season at home, potentially against the Raiders or the Chargers. So these are some of the things that we're going to keep our eyes on as the schedule release comes out here tonight, 6 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. You'll get a bonus episode of Locked On Broncos along the way. But Broncos Country, I want to hear your thoughts on today's episode of the show. Broncos, Titans, week 1, Christmas Day against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, and then a matchup against the New York Jets in London. What are your thoughts on these 3 games and when they happen? Make sure you sound off on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. We'll see you tonight for the NFL schedule reveal, where we'll go through the Broncos' biggest stretch, toughest stretch, games that could define the season. And we'll also get into some fun games as well as to which games might we see a rookie breakout player performance. So you get that and much more here on Locked On Broncos, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.